From spectacular accidents to uncontrollable infestations to mysteries that have no explanation. History holds narratives that horror film writers can only dream of creating. One of those stories is that of the Dyatlov Pass Incident. In the heart of the Soviet Union, amidst the harsh conditions of the Ural Mountains, a group of 10 seasoned hikers set out on an expedition that would later become one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century. The journey was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute. At the last post, just before the climb to the summit began, Yuri Yudin left the group due to illness. He regretted it at the time, but would later realize how lucky he had been. The goal of the young men was to reach the remote peak of Otorten. The hike began on January 27, 1959. The days passed and the hikers made steady progress. But the weather became increasingly harsh. On February 1st, they set up their last camp on the slopes of Kolotyakal, which means Dead Mountain in the Manx language. What led the group to choose this treacherous and dangerous location remains a matter of speculation. Before setting off on the trek, Dyatlov sent a telegram to his sports club and said the group was expected to arrive in Vijay no later than February 12th. But earlier, Dyatlov had told Yudin he expected the trek to take them longer. When the 12th passes without a message from Dyatlov, there is no reaction, as delays of several days are relatively common for such difficult expeditions. On February 20th, however, relatives of the mountaineers requested that a rescue operation be launched. On February 26th, rescuers found the hikers' tent, abandoned and damaged, with cuts from the inside out. There were no tracks in the surrounding snow other than those of the hikers. The rescuers set out on footprints left by socks or bare feet that lead down into the nearby forest, 1.5 kilometers, 1 mile to the northeast. At the time, the temperature outside was between -25 and -30 degrees Fahrenheit. At the edge of the forest, under a large pine, the remains of a small fire were found. The first two bodies of Krivonashenko and Doroshenko were found there, shoeless, wearing only underwear. The branches of the tree are broken to 16 feet high, suggesting that someone had climbed it. 3 more bodies were found between the pine and the camp, those of Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin in poses, suggesting that they were returning to the tent. They were found very far apart. It took more than 2 months to find the other 4 members of the group. Finally, they were found on May 4th under 13 feet of snow in a ravine 246 feet from the pine. The picture is horrifying. 3 of them were better dressed than the others, but it was later discovered that they were actually wearing the clothes of those who died first. Dubinina is wearing Krivonasheno's burnt and torn trousers, and her left leg is wrapped with a torn jacket. In addition, her tongue and eyes were missing. She and Zolotaryov had severe chest injuries, and Thibaut Brignoles had a fatal skull injury. The initial investigation concluded that the tourists died as a result of an overwhelming force of nature, but did not provide specific details, leaving many questions unanswered. Theories range from an avalanche to secret military tests, encounters with the indigenous Mansi population, and even alien involvement. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the case, suggesting that a combination of an avalanche of ice chunks and katabatic winds were possible causes. Researchers Johann Gaume and Alexander Puzerin used computer simulations to support this theory, arguing that these natural forces could explain the sudden stampede from the tent and the severe injuries. However, the lack of physical evidence of an avalanche and the unique injuries continue to puzzle experts. Despite forensic progress in the reopening of the case, the incident at Dyatlov Pass remains unsolved, shrouded in mystery and speculation. The official explanation of a natural disaster, although accepted as plausible, fails to explain all the peculiar details. After all, if there was an avalanche, how come only some of the tourists received such severe injuries, while others died of hypothermia? Sadly, the only certainty is that we will never know what happened to those 9 young boys and girls. By contrast, we know very well what happened between 1347 and 1351 and what killed over 100 million people in the middle of the 14th century. Europe was a continent of thriving cities and bustling trade routes, but it was also facing significant difficulties. This period set the stage for one of the most devastating pandemics in human history, the Black Death. The plague originated in Asia and spread to Europe via trade routes, reaching the continent in 1347. Carried by the fleas of rats, the bacterium Yersinia pestis caused the plague, which quickly spread across Europe and began to mercilessly decimate the population. It all began when the disease appeared in the port city of Messina, Sicily, in October 1347. Arriving ships carried not only goods, but also a deadly cargo of infected rats and fleas. The disease spread rapidly in Italy and by 1348 had covered most of Europe. The spread of the plague is beginning to spread unimaginable terror and chaos. The symptoms are terrifying: swollen lymph nodes, blisters, fever, chills, vomiting, and black spots on the skin. The disease was highly contagious, and within a few days, the infected person began to show symptoms. The number of casualties began to rise sharply, with some estimates suggesting that between 1347 and 1351, some 30 million people died in Europe alone. The rapid spread of the plague led to social collapse in many regions. Towns and villages remained deserted as survivors fled to the countryside in the hope of avoiding the plague. Traditional, social, and religious structures began to buckle under the pressure of mass death and despair. Many began to believe that the plague was God's punishment for the sins of mankind, leading to increased piety and persecution of minority groups, especially the Jews, who were accused of poisoning the wells. No one knew, however, that the worst was yet to come. The peak of the epidemic was in 1348 to 1349, when the plague reached its zenith, killing thousands of people a day in cities such as Florence, Paris, and London. In Florence, the chronicler Giovanni Boccaccio describes the panic very realistically, mentioning that even family ties broke down in the face of the disease and everyone sought salvation alone. The flagellants, groups of religious fanatics, began to go from town to town, publicly lashing themselves with the whip to atone for the sins of mankind and to plead for God's mercy. This shows how strong a sense of fear and hopelessness was gripping the people. When the initial wave of the Black Death began to recede around 1351, Europe faced the daunting task of rebuilding itself. It is estimated that the disease killed between 75 and 200 million people in Eurasia. According to the Norwegian historian Ole Benediktov, Europe's population declined by about 60%. This led to an acute labor shortage. This shortage in turn allowed the surviving workers to demand higher wages and better working conditions, which ultimately contributed to the decline of the feudal system. The social and economic upheavals caused significant changes in the demographic structure of Europe. Land ownership patterns changed, with many peasants acquiring land from deceased landowners, leading to a more mobile and flexible workforce. These changes laid the foundations for the economic transformations of the late Middle Ages. The spread of infection is gradually decreasing due to several factors. Quarantine measures have been taken, such as isolation of the sick in incoming ships, improved hygiene and sanitation practices, and the fact that over time a natural immunity has developed among the population and the most virulent strains of plague have declined. Ultimately, the Black Death fundamentally transformed European society. It exposed the weaknesses of existing medical knowledge and practices, prompting advances in public health and hygiene. Few stories could be as shocking as this one, but there are others that are no less horrifying. In the 1930s, airships, also known as zeppelins, represented the pinnacle of luxury travel. Among them, the Hindenburg was the pride of Nazi Germany. Commissioned in March 1936 at 804 feet long, the LZ-129 Hindenburg was the largest airship ever built. It was originally designed to be filled with helium, but due to U.S. export restrictions, the highly flammable hydrogen was used instead. On May 3, 1937, the Hindenburg departed Frankfurt, Germany, with 36 passengers and a crew of 61 on its first transatlantic flight of the season. The destination was Lakehurst Air Force Base in New Jersey, USA. The transatlantic journey was uneventful, and as Hindenburg approached Lakehurst on the evening of the 6th of May, 1937, a large crowd, including journalists and spectators, gathered to witness the landing. The maneuver, known as the Flying Pier, was carried out by dropping landing ropes from a great height to be pulled by winch to the mooring mast. But as the airship prepares to dock, things start to go wrong. At approximately 7:25 p.m., eyewitnesses reported seeing flickering tissue and a vague blue flame, possibly static electricity, near the upper fin of the airship. Suddenly, the Hindenburg burst into flames that engulfed the airship in a huge fireball within seconds. A catastrophe begins unfolding with terrifying speed and no possibility of counteraction. The Hindenburg falls from 200 feet to the ground, its hull scorched in just 34 seconds. Dramatic footage captured by news crews and the harrowing radio broadcast of Herb Morrison exclaiming, "Oh, mankind immortalized the event forever. Of the 97 people on board, 35 perished, as did one member of the ground crew. Many of the survivors received severe injuries, their survival dependent on their location at the time of the fire. Those who were near the windows of the promenade had a better chance of being rescued, while those who were in the interior parts of the ship were less fortunate. Immediately after the crash, frantic rescue operations are undertaken, and a rush is on to establish the cause. Initial investigations by the US and German governments concluded that the crash was probably due to a static electricity discharge igniting leaking hydrogen. However, numerous conspiracy theories emerged, ranging from sabotage by anti-Nazi elements to mechanical failure. Despite the findings, the exact cause of the fire remains unclear to this day. The Hindenburg crash marked the end of the airship era. The catastrophic event destroyed public confidence in lighter-than-air travel, leading to the decline of airships in commercial aviation. The tragedy also has an impact on aviation safety regulations and the handling of flammable materials. Dramatic or not, there are those events in our history that we are sure we know exactly how they happened. But it turns out we are often misled by mass delusion or misrepresentation of events. If you don't believe us, we prove it to you in the video, The Greatest Historical Events That Didn't Happen the Way You Think. So click the video on the screen and we'll be back together in a second.